The Biden administration released a new assessment report Wednesday. It measures China's compliance with the rules of the World Trade Organization. Did China live up to the promises it made to get into foreign markets in the first place? And what about more recent promises? NTD's Iris Tao has more.
China has violated commitments it made both 20 years ago and recently. In a new report released Wednesday, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative details how China has failed to deliver on a wide array of trade commitments, including ones it made in 2001 to first open up its markets to the West, and others under the 2020 trade deal.
Made clear that the Phase 1 deal did not address the core problems with China's state-led economy and harmful economic practices. USTR, since that period of time, has been making a concerted effort to see if China will show serious intent to make good on their purchase commitments. But the fact that they have not met those illustrates the limitations of the framework we inherited.
The criticism comes as the U.S. releases its annual report on China's compliance with WTO rules, the first such report under Biden. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai says China flouted free market principles and instead expanded a state-led approach, causing harm to workers and businesses around the world. The U.S. has repeatedly called for China to keep its promises. Here's Tai back in October.
For too long, China's lack of adherence to global trading norms has undercut the prosperity of Americans and others around the world. In recent years, Beijing has doubled down on its state-centered economic system.
Despite the calls, the latest data shows China ended up buying only about half of the U.S. products it had promised to buy. And House Republicans are now urging Biden to take immediate action. 60 of them sent a letter on Tuesday asking Biden to address China's $16 billion shortfalls in agricultural purchases. They're warning that a lack of enforcement action will set a precedent that will be detrimental for future trade negotiations.
NBA free agent Enes Freedom has been outspoken about human rights issues in China. Now he's in the running for the Nobel Peace Prize. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
Enes Freedom, formerly known as Enes Kanter, announced Wednesday he'd been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Freedom, who spent more than 10 years in the NBA, has been out of a job since being traded from Boston to Houston last week and then immediately released. The move has sparked outcry among politicians, fearing politics played a part in it. The 6'10" center has been the rare professional athlete willing to speak out about the human rights atrocities being perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. Last month, in a press conference hosted by Senator Rick Scott, Freedom called the Chinese Communist Party a brutal dictatorship. In November, he tweeted about how the Chinese regime engages in forced organ harvesting and that Tibetans, Uyghurs, Christians, and Falun Gong practitioners are all targeted. Freedom, who changed his name from Enes Kanter in November when he became an American citizen, has drawn ire from Beijing. Celtics games were pulled from Chinese video streaming giant Tencent back in October, following another Twitter post calling for an end to Beijing's ongoing repression in Tibet. Should Freedom win the award, the 29-year-old would be the fourth youngest to do so. Last year, there were 329 candidates for the prestigious prize. This year's winner will be announced December 10.
YouTube and TikTok track users more than any other social platform. That's according to security firm Atlas VPN. It says both of them use 14 different trackers to see what you're up to online. But we don't know exactly what they're gathering or where it's going. TikTok is Chinese-owned and operates under parent company ByteDance. The video-sharing app recently overtook Google as the most visited website in the world. A number of federal agencies, plus the U.S. military, have already banned staff from downloading it, citing national security risks and the China connection. A recent survey found that 80% of Americans are worried about their online privacy and would be willing to pay for social media in return for better protections. And right now, at least one company is trying to take advantage of that sentiment. MeWe is a U.S.-based Facebook alternative that doesn't track users or sell user data to advertisers. Instead, it makes its money by selling extra features to its users. Despite a strict no politics rule at the Olympics, related issues appear to have creeped in. Taiwan rebuked China on Friday for using the Beijing Winter Games to assert its sovereignty claims over the island. Taiwan says Beijing cast a shadow over the event to spread what it called improper political propaganda. Those comments came after a remark from Beijing's Olympic spokesperson on Thursday. She said there is only one China, referring to the country's long-held stance that Taiwan belongs to China. Beijing views self-governed Taiwan as its own territory, despite the island's democratically elected leaders and separate constitution. Under pressure from mainland China, Taiwan competes at the Olympics and most other international sporting events under the name Chinese Taipei. Taiwan's foreign ministry was quick to respond to Beijing's comments, stating Taiwan is Taiwan, not affiliated with the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China has never ruled Taiwan. Only a government freely elected by the people of Taiwan can represent the people of Taiwan in the international society. And noting Taiwan takes part in the Olympics in its own right and not as part of another country. It went on to say the Chinese official had cast a shadow over the peaceful spirit embodied by the Olympic rings. Taiwan took part in the game's opening ceremony after the team said it had received several notices by the International Olympics Committee, mandating the nation to attend both the opening and closing ceremonies. Taiwan had initially said it could not attend the opening ceremony due to delayed flights and COVID-19 rules. But people familiar with the matter said Team Taiwan had concerns Beijing would treat its athletes the same as the Hong Kong teams, because Hong Kong is part of China. That type of action would be seen as putting the two regions on the same level politically.
A former U.S. Navy nuclear engineer pleaded guilty to attempting to sell military secrets to a foreign country. His wife is also facing charges for helping him, and she has pleaded not guilty. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
Jonathan Toby, who is 43 years old, served in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear engineer and was assigned to the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program. He also held a top-secret security clearance, which gave him access to information concerning naval nuclear propulsion technology used in warships. Assistant Attorney General Matthew G. Olson of the DOJ's National Security Division said, "Among the secrets the U.S. government most zealously protects are those related to the design of its nuclear-powered warships. Nuclear propulsion technology allows warships to be out at sea for months at a time without needing to refuel." Toby is accused of concealing a digital memory card containing classified information inside a peanut butter sandwich at a dead drop location in West Virginia in June 2021, while his wife kept watch. After retrieving the SD card, the undercover FBI agent sent Toby a $20,000 payment in cryptocurrency. The Justice Department said Toby then emailed the undercover agent a decryption key for the SD card, which contained military-sensitive design elements relating to submarine nuclear reactors. In August, Toby made another dead drop of an SD card, and the undercover agent made another payment to Toby of $70,000 in cryptocurrency. In October, the FBI arrested Toby and his wife after placing a third SD card at another dead drop location, this time in West Virginia. As part of the deal with prosecutors, Toby admitted to conspiring with his wife to pass on restricted data. Under the terms of the plea deal, Toby will face a likely 12 to 17 years in prison. Now his wife is accused of helping her husband, and she is still facing criminal charges, and she pleaded not guilty.
And China, for quite some time, has been harvesting DNA from people all around the world, including Americans. Much of this done through buying up companies that store genetic data, providing testing products that collect DNA, setting up research labs, and more. Critics are concerned that the data could be used to further the Chinese regime's plans to boost its military power. Here are the details.
China is collecting genetic data on a massive scale. It's under the guise of biotech services and genomic studies, and it's happening more and more on U.S. soil. Some warn that the data can serve the Chinese Communist regime's aggressive military schemes. Now, the U.S. appears to be making moves to counter it. The most recent dealt a blow to China's largest biologics outsourcing company, WuXi Biologics. The company makes vaccine ingredients. Earlier this month, 2 subsidiaries of the company were added to the American government's unverified list. The Commerce Department says that's because they couldn't verify that WuXi Bio is using their U.S. exports in a legitimate and reliable way. That means American firms are now required to go through more procedures before shipping goods to these companies. What is Wuxi Biologics and how does it concern the U.S.? The company was founded in 2015 in China. It's been expanding in North America and Europe over the past few years, with 3 U.S. locations: Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. It's also planning to build a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in Delaware, a project that'll get partially funded by American taxpayer dollars through government grants. Last year, Wuxi Bio bought a Pfizer manufacturing plant in China, which gave it access to some of Pfizer's data. And when it was first founded in 2015, Wuxi Bio bought a stake in American DNA testing company 23andMe. But how are companies like Wuxi Bio expanding so fast? The short answer is Beijing, specifically its state-owned investment fund. In it, over $1 trillion. Since 2017, much of this money has been flooding into American biotech companies as part of the Chinese Communist Party's strategic plan called Made in China 2025. The plan identifies biotech as a strategic industry that qualifies for substantial government funding. Consequently, Beijing has allocated $100 billion for investment in the sector. In 2019, half of China's investment in the U.S. went to health, pharmaceuticals, and biotech sectors. And last year, Chinese drug makers filing for FDA approval hit a record high. These expansion efforts are likely tied to China's military through a state policy called the Military Civilian Fusion Program, launched in 2016. The program looks to boost China's military through adapting civilian technology for the defense sector. In 2017, China launched the world's largest human genome research project. Now, that program may go beyond the Chinese border and threaten U.S. national security. In an interview with the Epoch Times, China economics professor Dr. Antonio Graceffo mentioned one specific case, one where Beijing could collect DNA from American soldiers.
There was one case in particular where specifically it was a fertility clinic which was located within reasonable driving distance of 6 American military bases. So the idea was probably the CCP wants to own this fertility clinic, and then all the soldiers, and they're married and whatever, they're coming there for fertility or for paternity testing and things like that.
The CCP's goal shows no sign of slowing. Its DNA collecting efforts now have expanded across the globe. And at the center, China's Beijing Genomics Institute, or BGI. The company is closely linked to the Chinese military. And in 2013, it purchased Complete Genomics, a California-based company that holds genetic information on U.S. citizens. Last year, a report exposed that BGI had harvested genetic data from over 8 million pregnant women in at least 52 countries. According to Reuters, China has long considered genetic data collection as a national security issue. Since 2015, Beijing has restricted foreign researchers from accessing gene data on Chinese people. In contrast, the U.S. and Britain give foreign researchers access to genetic data as part of open science policies.
Tibet has stayed relatively quiet on the protest front since the start of the Beijing Winter Games. But the relative silence marks a major change from the last time Beijing hosted the Olympics, back in the summer of 2008. After more than a decade, we look at how sentiment in Tibet has changed under the Chinese Communist Party's iron fist.
Ahead of the Beijing Summer Olympics 14 years ago, Tibet was in revolt. Deadly clashes between Tibetans and security forces made global headlines. And for weeks, monks and herders battled bullets and batons. But today, Tibet has fallen silent, even as the Olympic Games come to Beijing for a second time. The reason is that in many ways, Beijing's plan to tame Tibet is working. Older Tibetans have resigned themselves to being part of China after decades of struggle. Younger Tibetans are split. Some still secretly long for independence, while others call themselves proud Chinese citizens. Abroad, activists find their calls falling on deaf ears as China uses its economic might to punish countries and companies that voice support for Tibet. Ever since China's army marched into Tibet in the 50s, Beijing's harsh controls have prompted Tibetans to demand autonomy, causing severe crackdowns. As the first Beijing Olympics approached in 2008, the cycles of protest and clampdown in Tibet accelerated, leaving over a dozen killed by protesters. And state security forces opened fire on demonstrators. Among the protesters was Tsawang Dondup, a Tibetan who was shot by officers after rushing forward to aid protesting monks and nuns. He lives in Canada after he fled Tibet in 2012.
I took part in those protests because I felt that the struggles that my family, my parents' struggle, and the struggle that I was facing shouldn't be passed on to my children.
After the 2008 Olympics, Beijing launched a sweeping campaign looking to control the hearts and minds of Tibetans. Billions of dollars have been poured into airports, highways, schools, and other construction in Tibet. Electricity and subsidized healthcare have come to vast swaths of the region. But with jobs and investment comes stepped-up security and surveillance aimed squarely at Tibetans.
We're in an era of China having ethnic profiling as its basic principle of policing and of management of society.
Robert Barnett, a Tibet expert in London, says phones and the internet have become tools to monitor and control. Those who speak up about the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader in exile, find their movements restricted. Some are placed under house arrest or imprisoned. In Drago County, authorities demolished a 100-foot-tall Buddha statue last year and forced residents to watch. Though Tibetan dissidents still smuggle news and images out of the region to fight back the communist regime, though doing so comes at great personal risk.
I can say there is not a single Tibetan in Tibet who wants to live under the Chinese state.
Most Tibetan children are now sent to boarding schools, studying mainly in Chinese. The teaching of Tibetan, their mother language, has been sharply curtailed. But memories of the Chinese Communist Party's suppression and the struggle Tibetans have faced in keeping their cultural identity have begun to recede into the past. Many young urban Tibetans have adopted Han Chinese manners and attitudes. In the Tibetan quarter of Chengdu City, where tens of thousands of Tibetans live, Chinese Communist Party officers armed with pikes and batons stand sentry, while police lights flash red and blue. Checkpoints and cameras line the roads, but residents seem to pay little heed. Many young Tibetans are forging a new bicultural identity without challenging Beijing's rule.
I'm a true Tibetan. I'm very proud to be Tibetan, and I love my ethnic culture. But at the same time, I'm a true Chinese. There's no conflict between these things.
This Tibetan dance teacher lives in Chengdu. She speaks flawless Mandarin and calls herself a devout Buddhist. She's one of many young people who have found a way to live under Beijing's watchful gaze without challenging the communist regime's rule.